afternoon or good evening if you're joining us from Europe or different parts of the world. We're very excited and very happy to continue our deep dialogue
Recording in progress
between the science and spirituality. We have today again our distinguished guests, Professor Bogdan Staszewski from College University Dublin in Ireland, and Professor Doug Powers from Dharma Buddhist University. Those of you who have a chance to be with us the last time know that Professor Bogdan Staszewski is very fluent in all the principles from quantum mechanics, not just knowing them quite well, but also he's very pragmatic. He uses those principles and with the group of friends has built a prototype of quantum computer. And we have a Professor Doug Powers who has been in decades engaged in presenting the Buddhist philosophy and thoughts and connecting and deepening, bringing them and introducing to the Western thought and maintaining this kind of deep dialogue with the modern mind. So for today, we reserve 1 hour, 30 minutes. First, we'll invite Professor Bogdan Staszewski to share his reflections and do the presentation. And after that, Professor Doug Powers will have some comments and reflections. And important element today, also we have a Q&A session around 25 minutes. So I will leave you with a main question: can quantum physics and Buddhists agree on consciousness? And please, Professor Bogdan, take us on the journey into a realm of quantum mechanics.
Okay, so let me share this. Does everybody see it? The slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is the second talk. The first one was recorded, and I think it was a prerequisite to watch the first one. But if you haven't, don't feel bad, because I'm going to go through major points from last time very quickly. So the reason I'm very interested in quantum mechanics, even though I'm a integrated circuits electrical engineer doing research in various aspects of IC technologies, we are building quantum computers, and the company is Equal One, and we are planning to put into production. So it's very difficult to explain one quantum computer's work without understanding the nitty-gritty details of quantum computing, and also try to interpret why they work. So a very quick overview, what is quantum physics? Because the topic is, can quantum physicists and Buddhists agree on consciousness? So first we need to agree on what is quantum physics. So quantum physics is a more complete version of Newtonian physics. It's a more, I don't say it's complete version, but it's a more, because people are working on to address the inefficiencies of quantum mechanics. So what is classical physics? Well, it's also called Newtonian physics, invented by Newton, and it describes the motion of macroscopic objects. Macroscopic objects could be apples flying on Newton's head, or heavenly bodies revolving around the sun. So he started this in 17th century. He formulated his very famous 3 laws of motion, and also universal gravitation, which basically applied to celestial bodies. And the math, it was applied very successfully to the classical physics, so-called, to solve many problems. And the math was later developed by, so actually Newton started calculus, but it was further developed by Leibniz and Euler, and then by Lagrange and Hamilton. So the key takeaway from quantum physics is that the future is deterministic, basically. It's predictable. Everything is deterministic. If I know the current state of all the bodies, including heavenly bodies, then I can predict with mathematical precision what the future is going to be. But the classical physics is incomplete because, for example, if you take that Newton's model of Earth orbiting orbiting Sun, you will calculate that, yeah, it gives you this acceleration. The body basically falls on Sun. The Earth falls on Sun at the acceleration of alpha. But if you're so, which is okay, it can continue indefinitely. But if this is an electron, classical physics basically tells you if there's an acceleration of electric charge, it will dissipate the energy. So if you have the model where you have a proton in the middle and the electron revolving around it, it will dissipate the energy. So it means that it will fall into proton and it will collapse. No such collapse is observed, right? So obviously the classical physics doesn't work there. So electrons, the model as we see for hydrogen atom here is not correct because electrons, when not observed, they are just clouds of probabilities. These are wave functions, and depending where they are, which orbits they are, because they can only accept discrete type of orbits, this is the probability of finding the electron field. So notice they are not circular. They can take very different shapes. So the electrons are pretty much everywhere, and the color, this is the scale, indicates probability of finding this electron. So very quickly, as a reminder, quantum physics examines the behavior of matter and energy at the possible smallest scales. It has wave-particle duality. In classical physics, particles are particles, wave are waves, but here they have both these wave and particle properties at the same time. There is a quantization of energy. There is a quantum superposition, meaning that quantum properties can have different values at the same time, and until we observe, they are pretty much all over the place. There's an entanglement where we bring the two quantum particles together. They are entangled and they become like one larger particles. They have properties which are basically shared. And the key takeaway is that quantum mechanics is probabilistic. It's not deterministic. Everything is based on probability. So the wave function was described by Schrödinger, and this is the Schrödinger equation. This is one of the 3D representations of this electron wave, for example, cloud. The y-axis is basically probability of finding this. So when Schrödinger formulated this equation, he didn't associated this wave function square, modulus wave function square, as a probability. He basically just said probability is just a probability, something very fundamental, right? And that interpretation was given by Born. So this is the wave function, psi. It depends on r position and time, and there is a energy which applies on this, and the energy basically makes its evolving. So there is an evolution of psi function with position and time according to these equations, according to mass, and you basically solve the first order differential equation. So the derivatives are all continuous, otherwise you won't be able to solve it. So the probability of finding the electron, for example, here is given by psi squared function. So that was a interpretation given by Born, and instead of observing, acting on these particles, we basically just applying the operators. This is something you don't do in a classical physics. So there are different properties which we don't observe at the macroscopic level, such as tunneling. So, for example, we cannot imagine car can go through the wall without breaking it, but particle can, no problem, because particle is just not a cannonball, but a wave function. So part of the wave function can go through. Quantization, meaning that in real life we can take any speed at all. So this boy can run at any speed, right, faster or slower. But so that's that's a classical system, but in quantum system, there is only discrete number of speeds, either slow or, for example, fast. Right? There is nothing in between. There is a superposition, so it means if we take an electron, it can be spin up and spin down, and until we observe it is in both spin at the same time. So this operator 0 could be spin up, operator 1 could be spin down, and we have a certain probability when we observe it, it will be either spin up or spin down, but until we observe it, it's both places at the same time. So when you apply this to microscopic object like a cat, the cat is both, let's say, horizontal and vertical at the same time, right? It doesn't move. The last one is entanglement. So it means that if I take two particles and if I separate them and take them to the different part of the universe, different parts of the galaxy, they will share the same properties. And if I manipulate one of them, apply operator on one of them, the other one will have an effect instantly without any delay, violating the speed of light. So this is the reason Einstein never accepted this. So what has happened? So these are the slides I presented last time. Basically, it started with in the 19th century with a Young's double slit experiment. We have light. We have two slits on a screen, and then the light basically go through these two screens, and they are waves. So they will have certain crests and peaks, and when they combine on the measurement screen, they will give you this kind of, so if we put measurement screen over here, so this is the separation, this is the location over here, the farther away we go from this slit, we will be observing these kind of patterns. So they add up, for example, constructively, because these are wavelengths, right? So in this case, they go in opposite directions. So there is a distraction, meaning that we don't observe anything. But if there is a proper delay between them, then they will add up constructively and we will see maximum intensity. So this is what we observe. And in reality, if you pass electrons through this, electrons are also have also wave function, then you're going to get this kind of interference pattern showing that the electrons have wave functions as well. So this is a classical view, right? We have a gun, we are shooting bullets, and we have two slots. So we are going to get distribution something like this when this slot. So we are randomly shooting like a shotgun, right? We are going to get this kind of distribution when this slit is closed. When we close this slit, we get this distribution. So on average, if we open them at the same time, we'll get something like this. Now, waves, whatever waves or light waves, will have this wave properties. So it will, if we close this slit, it will have something like this. If we close another slit, we have something like this. But if we open the two slits, there will be interference between them, right? According to this model, and we are going to observe this. Now, if we are shooting electrons and the dimensions are small enough, energy is high enough, we are going to get this kind of distribution, similar as with water waves or light. So we are going to get this kind of pattern. This is a new slide to basically show that if we placed a detector over here or over here, then we are not going to see the wave interference pattern, something like this. We are going to see something like this. So the fact whether we are detecting or not when the photon travels through the slit makes a difference in the interpretation of this, whether this is a wave or particle. So this has led Wheeler, the famous scientist, professor from Princeton University, to formulate this experiment where we basically sense the photons, individual photons, through this kind of system with a beam splitter. So whenever photon sees the beam splitter, it has a 50% chance, it's all statistical, to go through or get reflected, right? This is a mirror, so it always gets reflected. And if we put two detectors, then we will see 50% probability of observing these vertical blue photons, blue path photons versus red photons. Now, interesting things, if we put another splitter, meaning that in this case is a splitter, but here is a combiner, here. So the photon gets here and it can go either this way or this way. Photon goes here, can go either this way or this way. Then we don't see this measurement. We only see the photons coming from the horizontal direction. Means that if you do the math calculation, wavelength, so the interpretation here is wavelength. Here interpretation is particles, basically, right? Particle go either here or over here. Here is wavelength, meaning that the photon is being sent, it travels two paths at the same time, right? And then there is a constructive, on this path, there is a constructive interference, and here destructive interference. So the photons basically disappear from this. So the question is, how do these photon knows, because the photons are being sent here, what nature to accept at the very beginning? So to make it even more dramatic, what Wheeler did, he came with this delayed choice experiment where he basically says, okay, there are these quasars, they are black holes, very, very, very powerful black holes, which emit these photons on a regular basis. So we can use them as yardsticks for astronomy. And the photons basically go to Earth, but somewhere in the middle, there's galaxies. So galaxy has big mass and it acts as a gravitational lens. So the lens basically will deflect the wave. So now, if we put a telescope in this direction, then we'll see, yeah, there is a light coming from here in this direction. If we put telescope in this direction on Earth, we'll see it here. So this is very similar to this kind of experiment where the photons are just particles. Now, if we put the same splitter on Earth as we do here, the same splitter, then we will get the same results, meaning that only one of them is observed. So the question is, this quasar is 1 billion light years ago, right? So the photon was sent billion of light years ago. How does the photon know that after billion years, we are going to observe to put a beam splitter or not? Right? It doesn't know what kind of nature to take, whether particle or wave. So Wheeler was astounded by this. He basically says past has no existence except as recorded in the present, and universe does not exist out there independent of all acts of observation, which begs the question, what is reality then, right? If it depends on our observation. So Copenhagen interpretation basically was developed by the founding fathers of the first quantum revolution, and basically they avoided this problem completely. The equations work. That's why we use this equation to build quantum computers. We can build atomic bombs, nuclear plants, and so on, but we don't know how to interpret it. Their motto is to shut up and calculate, basically. It all works. We don't know how to interpret the reality, but who cares, right? As long as they can make money, be very utilitarian, be used for practical purposes, who cares what the reality is? And they basically propose the act of collapsing the wave function. But when you go to, I'm sorry, I'm going back to the previous slide. No. When you go to the Schrödinger equation, there is no account for collapse of the wave function. So collapse of the wave function is something which basically has no mathematical foundation in the physics. So another thing which perplexes scientists was entanglement, and most prominently Einstein was never convinced of this, and he actually wrote a paper against the interpretation of entanglement. But finally, last year, the Nobel Prize of Physics was basically given to 3 researchers who have shown that Bell inequality, which implies hidden variable, was incorrect. So Einstein was proven by physicists to err on this. So the Schrödinger equation, as I mentioned, doesn't have any collapse of the wave function, right? It's fully deterministic. There is no randomness here, right? There is no randomness. It basically says there is a wave function. You put force, you put a potential in this, and it evolves according to the applied potential, and that's it. The evolution is not randomness. Only randomness if we observe something, right? Then we create so-called wave function collapse, and it can go anywhere. Also, there is no causality here implied, right? The causality is only at the macroscopic level, not microscopic level. So that's the biggest, if you want to confound a physicist who believes in Copenhagen interpretation, basically ask him, well, how do you account for collapse of the wave function, right? So you have a wave function like this, it basically collapses. There is no equation for this. There is observation that instead of waves, you have particles, but how do you account for this, right? So this will be complete amazement. So the interpretation here is that you have the reality is just a wave function, psi function over here. It resolves based on the forces acting on these particles. So you have a bunch of wave functions. That's our universe. We actually introduced the new letter W to stands for world. This is the world which nobody can measure. X is our observation, and whenever we look into this wave function into something, then we observe the world. But if we don't look, this world doesn't exist. We go back to this wave functions, which is basically bunch of psis. So the consequence of that was also formulated by Schrödinger, who showed this absurdity of trying to apply the classical interpretation, trying to apply the wave function collapse to the macroscopic objects. So what we have some radioactive material which produces gamma radiation. That gamma radiation is detected. When it's detected, it breaks the bottle with poison, and then the cat is dead when this happens. So until you observe it, right? So if the box is closed, if you don't know what's going on, the wave function of the cat is determined by the wave function of this subatomic particles, which basically is supposed to radiate. So it means that the cat has a wave function state which is alive and dead. So until you observe it, it's in both states, dead and collapse. But obviously, this shows the absurdity by this, and the physicists are still astounded and are not able to explain properly how this is happening, how to relate the microscopic to macroscopic. So Hugh Everett proposed an interpretation of multiverses, meaning that there is no wave function collapse. The two possibilities, cat being dead and alive, are being split into the two different universes, and then there is going to be subsequent splits. So this is how the world perception evolves. And he made it part of his PhD thesis. He defended, and so far nobody has found any flaw in his interpretation. So how does it apply to the evolution of our perception? Well, you have this world, there is an event. This event can create two possibilities, right? The couple is together, or they break, then they have kids, maybe they don't have a kids, and so on. So you have different candidates, different worlds, and they are running at the same time. So it means that these four worlds, they are not being collapsed, they run at the same time. But, to me, Buddha never mentioned such parallel universes, so it's a bit strange explanation, even though nobody has shown any flaw in this interpretation. And the last time I showed this picture, where basically we have multiple universes, I never liked this, but I couldn't come up with a better representation of these evolving multiple universes, where basically different action, different possibilities are contained in these universes. I think better interpretation will be deck of cards, right? So our universe is three-dimensional, right? And this is the problem with our senses. We cannot picture four-dimensional universe. So our universe is three-dimensional. So we think the parallel universe exists somewhere in the 3D space separated from the current universe, which is kind of absurd a bit, right? So this is a better, but it's difficult to show 3D universe. So I'm basically collapsing the whole universe to 2D universe, which is just a card. Right. So now, if there is there are 100 different possibilities, right, of the wave function collapse, then it's like a deck of cards. Each card would be very similar to the other cards, but there will be one tiny difference between them, and there will be basically evolution of these cards. So card is this two-dimensional to represent 3D, but in reality, if you have this deck of cards, there will be 4D deck of cards, because you have three dimensions of the universe, and then the evolution of these choices happen in the fourth dimension. So that is basically shown over here. So what does it mean for Buddhism? Well, very quickly, because I already went through this, the classical mechanics, Newtonian mechanics, basically it's deterministic, so there is no free will. Schopenhauer basically says, I do not believe in free will. The first quantum revolution has introduced randomness. So there is a possibility now to reconcile with religion, because religion believes, any religion believes that there is a free will, basically, right? Otherwise, what's the point of what's the point of being virtuous? What's the point of doing anything? And if we are doing anything, what's the point of doing good things rather than bad things, right? Even U.S. Supreme Court said that denying free will be like just throwing away the whole legal system in the United States, right? So who are we to argue with the Supreme Court? Then early Buddhism has the concept of Atman, that Atman basically positively does not exist. So there is a assertive denial of soul. What is rejected was the rejection of Atman as a substance, not Atman as a process. So Buddha basically says, yeah, there is a continuous stream of skandhas, of dharmas, right, based on the 5 skandhas, and that flow is basically what could be perceived as I, even though that doesn't exist, because it's all discrete set of events. And self, Atman, is being used just colloquially. So I should diligently practice to reach Nibbana. I mean, if I does not exist, Atman does not exist. So who diligently practices to reach Nibbana? That stream of consciousness, the process I, needs to do that in order to reach Nibbana. And I would say Western religions would not agree with this process definition of Atman, but modern science certainly would. Look at biologists, psychologists, psychiatrists. They believe that the self is just a stream of psychophysical processes. Now, the difference is because there is a beginning and end in science, and there is no such in Buddhism, right? You can never go back and find the first cause. And this is being handled at the 3 levels, so-called 3 turnings of wheel. In the first turning of wheel, which is early Buddhism, Atman is an illusion, but Dharmas exists, right? You cannot enter the river twice, because the river is just a stream, and it's different, even though at the distance look the same. The second turning of wheel is just both Atman and Dharmas are illusions. So you cannot enter the river even twice, because the river doesn't really exist. But this created the danger of nihilism. So the third turning of wheel, which is Yogacara, Mahayana Buddhism, basically says that Atman and Dharmas are non-dual. You and the river are the same, and objects, and what Vasubandhu said, object do not exist outside of consciousness. And many people misinterpreted Yogacara as idealism, which is not, by concentrating only on the first part, objects do not exist, while forgetting about the second part, which is outside of consciousness. And this basically solves the body-mind duality problem, which is Western Cartesian model. So I discussed this in quite detail last time. So basically, this is the view of so-called physicalism, which assumes that the physics 3D space-time exists, and somehow it gives rise to consciousness. So there is something that gives birth, arises, lasts, and then dies. But Buddha's view is something like this. And the question is, what happens in between? So Hinduism, for example, which believes in the incarnation, says there is Atman, which basically on top of that, which basically survives. But in Buddhism, there is nothing really that goes from the death to birth, because this view is not proper, right? And another thing is what causes, if we take physicalism, which basically says that the consciousness arises from objects, from electrons and quarks, how is it happening? I mean, if I get a collection of these neurons, I don't really see how consciousness is being created, right? And this could be a problem, because if the consciousness is really created inside these neurons, if I turn off the switch, meaning the body dies, then everything disappears, right? So no matter what I do, whether good things, bad things, they all disappear at death. This is just like turning off the computer, right? And destroying the hard disk drive, and removing the power supply from DRAM, SRAM memory. The whole memory just simply disappears. So there is a correlation, indeed. What Buddhists believe, that there is a correlation between brain and mind, and basically there are experiments which basically says if you radiate some EM into the brain, then you might not observe colors, for example, or you will get confused between left and right. So there is definitely correlation between brain and mind, but there is no proof so far, no proof absolutely that there is a causation between brain and mind. Right? And people run experiment that basically show they do something to the brain, and this gives a certain state of consciousness, but there is no proof that this is happening like that. And this is similar to, for example, rooster crowing that the sun is rising, announcing the date, but does rooster cause the sunrise in the morning, right? Or for example, if you see people on the train station congregating at the tracks, and then train comes. Do people congregating at the tracks cause the train to come? Obviously, there is some underlying reality, which is time schedule, which basically causes all this synchronization. So, so far, there is no answer. So the Buddhist view is physicalism is wrong, right? There is a nothing of substance transmigrates from death to birth, and so on. The question is, what is the information transfer? But again, this is a physicalist view, and we might have difficulty trying to understand what goes from death to birth, if we cling to this physicalist view. So we need to have another view, right? So Yogacara, for example, has introduced root consciousness, which lies underneath this, alaya vijnana. And basically everything springs from that. That eighth consciousness is like substratum, which basically creates this birth and death as the illusion. But in reality, there are no bodies. Okay, so Vasubandhu is probably closest to the modern physics, tries to explain the rebirth, which is mind is outside the body of brain. There is a correlation, but there is no causation, right? What is the function of the brain? The brain is just a locus of mind, but how do they relate? Vasubandhu basically claims that the world object, which is objects, does not exist outside of consciousness, and many people disregard this word outside of consciousness. And we have a problem that in quantum physics, the observation is necessary to perform the wave function collapse, but we don't know what that wave function collapse is. And what is also common between physics and Yogacara is that there are seeds, which is energy, right? And in the Schrödinger equation, you have energy which acts in the wave function, right, which basically causes evolution, and something similar happens to eighth consciousness. So there is a hard problem of consciousness. David Chalmers basically has spent a lot of time investigating it, and the consciousness is kind of ill-defined. So he spends lots of time on defining as qualia, which is subjective experience. Qualia is the experience of something, experience of taking chocolate, or experience of smelling garlic. You know, you either feel pleasant or unpleasant. Or, for example, how does it feel to see blue color, right? And if this is somehow related to the actions going on in brain, it's very difficult to prove, to see how is it happening, right? That certain electrons going through the brain cause the experience of blue color. And he basically concluded that this is a hard problem, in contrast to easy problems such as sending man to Mars, finding cure for cancer. Von Neumann-Wigner had this follow-up to Schrödinger cat, because there is too much controversy, which basically says that if we are observing spin of an electron inside the box, inside the laboratory. So Wigner is somewhere outside, the friend is enclosed, there is no communication. Then the friend, laboratories, will know what is happening, but because Wigner outside doesn't observe it, doesn't know yet, then the whole thing will be still in the state of superposition, right? So the friend and the system is in the state of superposition. So he concluded the only explanation of this would be if wave function is something necessary to basically collapse, create the collapse of the wave function. So consciousness is the one that is causing wave function collapse. It cannot be done by detectors. If I put a detector which has no consciousness, how this detector is different from just a matter, right? So if I keep on adding more atoms, more complication to the atoms, higher degree of relationship between them, this is just a more complicated physical structure, right? It doesn't change the quality. So how does it resolve the wave function? The only way to resolve the wave function is to bring something which is different from the physicality, which is mind. So that was basically the conclusion. And that together with a delayed choice experiment, basically says, so this is my interpretation of this, which might most likely is not going to be correct, but we can work on this, that instead of having these multiverses being evolved and all of them surviving, because Buddha doesn't really say anything about multiverses, I believe that the trellis gets pruned, right? So whatever doesn't agree with the karma, there's some kind of karma underlying your previous actions. And if something doesn't agree with this effect, basically that universe gets proved, and only ones that agree with your karma would continue forward. But the flow of quantum information is back and forth, back in time and forward. So this was the last slide. We basically finished 2 months ago. There is kind of equivalency between Yogacara, and quantum mechanics. So in quantum mechanics, we have a wave function, and low-hanging fruit is to equate this with Alaya Vijnana. Then the energy, which is a Hamiltonian acting on this wave function to evolve it, is basically bijas, right? And Vasubandhu also talks about energy as bijas, right? And the collapse of the wave function is just rupa. This is the collapse. If I look into this, I will see this. If I close my eyes, this doesn't exist. And on top of that, the pure conscious awareness, if there is nothing in there, just conscious awareness, this would be a Tathagata Garbha. So that was the last slide, and this is the part 2 of the presentation. So with the part 2, I would like to show this mathematical work done by Donald Huffman, he's a professor at UC Irvine. He got his PhD from MIT. So he has studied consciousness, visual perception, but using mathematical models and psychophysical experiments. And he positively denies that the brain activity causes conscious experience. And what is novel here is that he combined evolutionary game theory, right, which is theory of evolution, but evolution number 2, not the original Darwinian, and quantum information theory to develop mathematically rigorous models. So what I like about this particularly is that there is a mathematical rigorous model. So he has these 3 theories. He coached these theories in terms of equations using higher algebra, anybody who has some experience, some knowledge of this higher level algebra, for example, many people studied mathematics at the graduate level, can poke holes and say, oh, this is incorrect, this is correct, and so on. So he basically makes it open. There is no misinterpretation. It's all mathematically correct. So the first part was psychophysical activity. It was actually studied in Fechner in 1860, and it was formulated that natural selection has shaped our perceptions to be, in the typical case, accurate description of reality, especially of those aspects of reality that are critical for our surviving. So he kind of disagrees with this. He says this is not the case, and the only examples given by scientists in favor of this is so-called veridical perception, applied mostly to vision. Right, but Huffman disagreed, and he has discovered by running math and also simulations using game theory. He ran hundreds of thousands of these simulations, and he has basically proven that in different universes, not only in ours, given different starting condition, different choices, different organism, the chances of survival of species is goes to zero if the perception agrees with the reality. So the nature does not want us to see the reality as it is, because we have no way of surviving it as species. So this was the conclusion. So he introduces various concepts, multimodal user interface, the interface theory of perception, and conscious realism, to basically drive his point home. So multimodal user interface, MUI theory, is that perceptual experiences do not match or approximate properties of the objective world, but instead provide a simplified user-specific user interface to the world. So the world is like a computer system where you have files, you have transistors, integrated circuits, software, and so on. And that's your world, that's your reality. But we don't let the user deal with that reality directly. We present to the user this graphical user interface, right? Where basically the file that contains all the electrical fields in 100,000 of MOS transistors is basically captured by this file over here, by this file. Right, so this is icon, and the only way we see the content of the reality is through this file. So the evolution basically has driven our consciousness to only see this file. So we don't see the reality, which is diodes, MOS transistors, software, electrical currents, but we see the icon. Also, he's bringing examples of virtual reality headsets. So, for example, you have 2 tennis players, and you have powerful server, which basically processes this 3D information, and there is this yellow ball, and the ball is being seen by both players. And there is a causal relationship, right? You basically move your hand, then this tool basically hits the ball, then another player also hits the ball. So there is a lot of causal relationship between them, and both see the same ball at the same time, maybe from different viewpoints. But the ball is computer generated. Does it exist? Obviously, it's not. It exists only in integrated circuits as currents, going through and charge in MOS transistors, right? But both these players see the ball at the same time, right? So Vasubandhu, what Vasubandhu said to this is that this ball doesn't exist outside of our consciousness. And the thing I was struggling with is that why two people would see the same thing, or the whole, simply because they are connected to the same system. And Vasubandhu would say the karma is similar. He didn't have different terms to use this. So our experiences are mainly icons. We basically manipulate. They are not real, but it doesn't mean that they are not effective, right? For example, if I take this icon and throw it away and put it in the trash, it will have effect of losing lots of my work, basically. So would I do that? No. Do I realize that this is unreal? Yes. But do I throw it away? No, because I will lose lots of work. But they don't correspond to the objective truth. So the interface theory of perception is basically says that our perceptual experiences do not map what exists in reality completely, that the space-time of modern physics is just our illusion, just icon, basically, what we see in the interface. And this is in contrast to so-called critical realism, which is conventional wisdom, which basically says that what we observe can be split into two classes of experiences, right? The first one corresponds to the reality, second not. For example, if I had the headache, cataracts, right? Vasubandhu also talks about cataracts. That would not correspond to the reality. But if I see something that would, which is the primary, that would correspond to the reality. So shape, for example, of an object would correspond to the reality. But is the taste of chocolate, right, or smell of garlic, does it correspond to the reality or not, right? So if you are scientists, you might get different opinions. Conscious realism basically says that these are all icons, and if I have lion or child, these are icons, right? So they are not real, but they are merely object, which evolution has basically forced for us to act to protect our lives and pass on genes. So if we take care of icons such as lions or children, then we will survive and we'll pass the genes to the next generation. Our species can continue. So he coaches this in terms of mathematical language, which basically introduces the world. So this is the world that we cannot perceive. This is our experience, qualia. And then there is action, which we do in response. So the world, experience, and action, these are spaces in higher order mathematics. So for example, this could be vector matrices or tensors. There is a communication kernel, so the world communication through the kernel, it obviously collapses. We have a certain experience, and based on this experience, there's a probability. So there is a probability here that we will do certain things, and then we act to change the world. So he basically builds in these papers. I read these papers. He builds this model. So this is a perception kernel. There is a decision kernel, which we act. So there's a bunch of probabilities, right? So this is how we models free will, simply based on probabilities that, for example, if I see the world and due to my perception, I will see it as a taste of chocolate, then I want to eat it, but I will not grab probability of grabbing the salad when I experience the chocolate will be zero, right? But probability eating chocolate when I experience chocolate will be quite high. So there are a bunch of these probabilities there, and depending on this, I make an action which changes the world. So I cannot observe P and A simply because I know there is no way of knowing what the world is, but I can know the product of P and A, and also product of P and A and D. So then he goes into this math, very complicated math. You need to have a master's in theoretical mathematics to basically understand it. So he defines a six-tuple. Six-tuple, there is a measurement space. He he applies this, and then he introduces the question, what is world? So for example, if I have a space-time physics dualism, the world will be just physical world, and experience and action will be just consciousness, right? So he introduces this concept of conscious agent, right? But the conscious agent can be combined, and this is the beauty of this. We can combine into more conscious agent. So there is a one conscious agent here. There's another one, and the action of one conscious agent are perceived as experience of the other, and the other makes action which is perceived by the other. So these conscious agents exist even when we are looking into this. So this, he rejects solipsism, basically, that only you exist as a consciousness. Okay, then we add three conscious agents. So this and this is the same. So this is a 2D view. So when we overlap this with this, we obtain something like this. And the interesting things, because every theory has to bring something interesting, something novel, right? So C1, which is consciousness 1, interacts with C2, these two, and C3, but in a different way. You see, these vectors, these probabilities are different. So it means that these agents see different action, different perceptions from each other. And then we can continue adding these agents. So what are these agents? Well, the agent starts very simply with let me skip. So the agent seems very simply as one bit, because when you build a math, you need to build something very simple. So it's just a one bit communication, could be bacteria or something like that. Then we keep on adding more and more agents. So here there are three agents, and these agents could be one entity, one larger entity. So it becomes more complicated, and it also solves the combination problem, which is basically says that this theory of consciousness being fundamental, it's needs to answer lots of questions, and one of them is combinational problem, which is stated that how the myriad elements of atomic consciousnesses, right? One bit is atomic consciousness, can be combined into new complex and rich consciousness, such as we humans or animals possess. And there are two issues here. The combination of phenomenal experiences, which is qualia, right? Start from something simple, like, for example, if I take salt, garlic, onion, basil, and tomato, somehow I combine them and create a completely new pasta sauce experience, right? And then combination of subjects, right? I have consciousness 1, 2, 3, as I've shown before, I saw before. And when I combine into a higher organism, how do they add? So very quickly, without going into math, he introduces this high-level algebra, which basically the two consciousnesses, we have consciousness 1, 2, he creates one, which is superposition, entangled of these two. And this operator, basically, combination creates a new space which combines the two consciousness. And we can iteratively increase the complexity of this consciousness ad infinitum. So he started with this interesting picture. There is like a bacteria, then we go through physics and biology. We have humans, then he makes a little bit fun and projects some spiritual beings and God. And at the top, basically, there is somebody that knows all of this. The perception function is very powerful. So there is a overall view of everything that is going on without going through time-space continuum. So this answers up to now that theory, the question, or addresses the question of consciousness, now the objects, right? So he keeps on deriving this. It's a very complicated math, and the final equation is this for the experience, and it has harmonic solutions, which is something like this. Which leads to this equation. And this equation is uncannily similar to the Schrödinger equation in a different of a free particle. So he basically said that the dynamic interaction of two agents gives rise to a free particle. So for the first time mathematically, you have equations theory, which basically says consciousness starts first. There's an interaction between conscious agents, and this gives rise to matter. Okay, so these are the observations, how to tie that equation that he derives with with the wave function, different properties that the position is and time are basically just derived from this. So in conclusion, I'm running out of time. This theory of consciousness has a potential of mathematically prove Yogacara. I put here potential because it's just a theory. So it's basically code in mathematical term. Anybody knowing higher algebra, sigma algebra in this case, can investigate it, poke holes, because all the terms are technical terms, so you can analyze it mathematically. And according to this, consciousness is fundamental, and the space, time, and physics are just emergent. They are just abstractions, just what we perceive, and that was shaped by the biology, by the process of genes, of how do we survive different environments. And even time is relative to the experience flow. There is a counter in that conscious agent, which basically every time there is perception and decision and action, the counter is increased, and that counter corresponds to time. So time is basically something very subjective to a particular agent, and the objects are explained is simply emerging from the agents, conscious agents interactions, oscillations. Thank you very much.
Unmute yourself, Doug.
We can leave the conclusions up there. Okay. So, am I unmuted?
Sure.
We see you now. And
Okay.
hear you.
Should I share the conclusions again? Because they disappear.
We'll come back to them. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. If you can get them back on, we'll come back to them in a second. So, but you can, yeah, we can go either way. So, yeah. So thinking through this incredibly great presentation, I hope everybody, I know a lot of people watching probably weren't involved with some of the mathematics at the end, and I think most people here, because they had listened to the first one, had a sense of what we were going to do today. He's really exploring and was thinking about this in the meantime, and a lot of this exploration is very experimental. So, however, the development of what was being said just now doesn't conflict in any way that I can see, and basically augments the overall Yogacara presentation. Of course, Yogacara has many different schools and many different approaches, and one of the major issues in Mahayana Buddhism was the different schools of Yogacara. So, don't want to speak for all schools at one time, but just talk in general for a few minutes in reaction to what was said. So maybe the easiest way to come at it is to respond is to look at the general categories of the imagined, the dependent, and the real. So basically, from Yogacar's view, we're constantly imagining, we're constructing our experience at the point of contact in the senses. So the critical thing is that to think about from the very beginning of this is that we are embodied. So we're talking about humans here, at least in the context of our conversation. And humans are embodied, and the primary way in which human beings have experience is through contact of the senses. And there's basically six senses. There's a sixth sense that is added from a Yogacara view that's extremely important, and that's the sixth sense is the cognitive sense. So there's the first five senses that we're very familiar with, and then there's the sixth sense, which processes, is a processor. Every moment of experience that we've ever had from the beginning has all come about at the point of contact. So consciousness, from the first moment that we have any experience of it, started at some point of contact. And we're not going to go through all the different theoretical constructs from Sharangama and so forth of different ways this might have come into view, just like we're not going to get into, the classical theory that would say that the entire universe, the quote unquote material universe, came out of the first moment of a singularity of infinitely small energy that from which that. So we're not going back to first cause in either case here in our discussion. We're talking about it from the vantage point of what we're already experiencing from each of our experiences. And so as we go through those experiences, we right now are already a huge compilation of these imagined moments of sensation that then through the experience of planted these seeds. The seeds are just energy packets, are just quantum of energy. I mean, thinking of them as energy fields is much closer to what Yogacara meant and Vasubandhu meant by seeds. He was meaning exactly fields of energy that have potentials to arise according to conditions. They arise according to conditions, and when the conditions are right, they arise to consciousness. So throughout the process of our existence, we're continually planting these seeds or these packets of energy. They're not anywhere. They don't exist in some space or time. They exist it's like you can't, to try to imagine where these potentialities exist, you're already having to construct some kind of place. And there isn't any place where this is actually occurring in the sense that we would usually talk about, place. Nevertheless, there is a massive collection. By the time each of us in this gathering are having a conversation with each other, we have a massive collection of these, because not only would Buddhism see them occurring in this lifetime from the moment of birth or even prior to birth all the way back into the womb, but from lifetime to lifetime, what does pass is certain kind of tendencies. That this isn't limited to the material embodiment of each embodiment, but the actual eighth consciousness, meaning this realm of these energy fields, continues on through time from embodiment to embodiment, or even if it becomes a god, even if it isn't embodied in human form, it still continues. And we would have to get into a lot of discussion of that, but let's leave that alone for the moment. So that so on the first issue that comes up about this is kind of a matrix of interrelated energy packets, and these energy packets form a whole universe. And the whole universe of them, each individual processing of this that we identify as a particular stream of processing, has its matrix, a total matrix of these, and they're completely interactive. So as each new seed is planted, they interact with the seeds that are already there, the energy fields that are already there, and each energy field is actually affected by every other energy field. So the totality of energy fields are affected by each additional energy field. How are they added to? By awareness. At the point of contact and awareness, when conscious awareness attends to something arising at contact for a long enough and intense enough way, which is clearly described in Abhidharma text, which we're not going to get into now, very technical, how long it has to last in the conscious awareness, the conditions of which the intensity of which it exists in. As that happens, if it reaches a certain level of conscious awareness, then it plants this seed, or in the case that we're talking, has this energy field that is in process of continuing in some realm. And we're just talking about realm now metaphorically. And so each of us is a history, but they're interrelated with all other histories, because much of what's coming in contact is coming in from social interaction, from all kinds of interactions that we're having at contact with not only nature, aspects of nature, but aspects of culture, aspects of, so a massive amount of what's happening in contact is interconnected and interrelated in larger realms of intersubjectivity, interconnection with other realms that are happening within their own experience. Because at the point of contact, what's actually there that we're experiencing, the only thing that matters about what's actually there is the interpretation or experience of that through the processing of that conscious awareness. So in the same, as we're talking about collapse of wave function, the collapse of wave function in this case is occurring at each moment of conscious awareness. There's a collapse of wave function, meaning in the case of Yogacara view, that the possibility or probability of one of these energy fields arising to conscious awareness and becoming the content of that awareness happens, and it also happens according to probability, because the seeds that have been planted have different levels of intensity and come up with different possibilities related to what contact is occurring in the present in the first five senses and the sixth sense. And so therefore, the relationship with something that's arising now will create by association a possibility and probability of something arising. So the flow is constantly flowing with the conditions, but on the other hand, there's always what word we want to use here is, I think still we want to use probability and intention. There's a certain kind of attention to the present that creates the conditions for that probability to arise. So we have to look at this, I think in lots of ways, there's ways of talking about that overlap really well. So the things that Buddhism has a lot in common in physics is there's nothing outside this causal construct. I think the reason that up until now why there's been so much difficulty in having an adequate description of the situation is that up until fairly recently, humans needed some sense of world, or had to have some sense of an entity that existed, or an agent of soul that existed outside the process itself. So there is no, from both physics and Buddhism, there's no agent operating outside of the process itself. We're only describing the process as it's being experienced in each, and the only place that each individual is experiencing it in any way that we can talk about is in their process of observation, their process of experience. And in a sense, there's already a multi-universe system built into it. Whether it's the same exact multi-universe system that we're talking about in physics is still left to be discussed. But certainly from the model that Yogacara has, each universe, each reality construct that's occurring as any kind of sense of actual conscious experience is occurring within the experience of each process as it's being processed by the flow of the of that particular history. There's an archaeology to each consciousness that each of us is experiencing that we often misunderstand to be a self or an I. There's no agent there of I, but there's nevertheless the historical karmic process of that's occurring, that's based upon all the past experiences of conscious awareness that process has happened. That's reached a level of intensity to actually be to plant one of the seeds, which then is an ongoing process. So the only sense in which there's time and space is just that process. I mean, time is only a relationship in awareness of dharmas to one another. There is no time outside of the relationship of dharmas to each other. There's no space. Space is just a projection of awareness from awareness. There's no way to know, there's no existence, there's no way to have projected existing outside of the mind in that sense. So you could say that there's already a multi-worlds view that might lay over this, and that each individual entity that we see around us, starting from our own experience, is a total universe unto itself that is actually experiencing moment to moment in a process of experience the contact of sense experience, and at that moment also having this association with past experience and having probabilistic elements arise within them that becomes the content of that experience. So that's what we call, so in this, that's the dependent nature. So we're talking about there's three elements: the imagined, the dependent, and the real. So the imagined is what happens at each moment in the interpretation of experience on the level of immediate experience at the senses. The dependent is the collective sense of that past experience of that it becomes the sort of, I guess, best way to say, the existential isness of that experience as it's actually experienced. The Buddha said about that isness that at contact, having any speculation about whether something existed outside of that content or not was totally a waste of time from the point of view of what was actually going on, because it could only be a projection of that experience. It had to be made up in some kind of way. It always would have to be made up in some kind of way, and therefore was not useful to the issue of existence, because it didn't actually, then the consciousness didn't pay attention to where it was actually processing experience at a level that mattered in any kind of way whatsoever. I mean, it only mattered, for the Buddha, it only mattered at the point of the system of interpretation that you are bringing to bear on each moment of existence, to begin to transform the theoretical construct you were bringing to bear in a way that would cause less suffering, less entanglement, more freedom of mind, or less freedom, more entanglement, more suffering. So the process of the process of trying to analyze whether something existed outside of that content or not, in the way that humanity has spent a lot of time speculating on, takes the mind away from working at the place that it could actually make a difference. Eventually, what is this conditional? I mean, I think we're in these theoretical concepts, when we're looking at quantum physics, I think we're particularly looking really into the issue of what the conditional that we would have any kind of sense of feeling like we could collectively talk about in some kind of way, what that would entail in terms of the conditional. If we get to the real, if we completely agree, the Buddha agrees that if you look into the real, you would see it was empty. That the looking into the real, which actually is very interesting, that corresponds with the last points being made, because if we look into what's really going on, then awareness would see it was completely empty, of that it was all constructed, and therefore there was neither agent and there was neither something actually there as dharma or phenomena. And in the Mahayana, the goal, since there is this process in motion, in the Mahayana, the goal is to both be able to see it as empty and at the same time be able to engage phenomena at the same time. So I think a lot of these ideas that have been put forward today, I don't think any of them contradict the fundamental issues of Yogacara. I think Yogacara put a little bit different emphasis on where cultivation would operate around, because eventually Yogacara would suggest that if you put your mind to attending to stillness, to emptiness, and not so much to the content of what was arising, that you'd eventually be able to see the mind has the capacity, consciousness has the capacity to see directly into what's arising without a theoretical construct. Right now, the only thing that we can do in terms of trying to understand what's going on is have some sort of theoretical construct that we're applying. But ultimately, the mind doesn't actually need theoretical constructs it needs them to communicate. There's no way that we'd be able to communicate with that theoretical construct. But in the direct experience of the mind itself, it doesn't necessarily need to use those theoretical constructs that have been created over sort of the archaeology of time of the experience of our experience that's taken in some sort of symbolic constructs from the general experience that have come through into our experience. So I want to leave enough time for questions. So there's a lot more to say, but a few thoughts, and then let's get questions.
Yeah, so anybody have any questions for Doug and Bogdan? I know definitely it was not so easy to follow all the kind of mathematical equations and charts and so forth. Oh, but somebody, maybe we'll just type in the chat box and I'll kind of review.
Why don't we go back to putting everybody on the screen so we can see everybody? Maybe go back to, yeah, okay.
Okay, so I see there's a couple of things in the chat box here. So first one is from Lizzie. If I just try to summarize this. Okay, so I'll read it because it's quite complex. Yogacara, although as one of the 8 or 10 schools of Mahayana, never conflicts with the Buddha's teachings as recorded in Tripitaka, Abhidharma, and Theravada. And it gives a couple references. And says that because the external universe, according to Abhidharma, is an outer reflection of the internal cosmos of the mind, registering in concrete manifest form, the subtle gradations and states of consciousness. This does not mean that the Abhidharma reduces the outer world to a dimension of mind in the matter of philosophical idealism. The outer world is quite real and possesses objective existence. However, the outer world is always a world apprehended by consciousness, and the type of consciousness determines the nature of the world that appears. Consciousness and the world are mutually dependent and inextricably connected as such. Oh, do they have a question? Oh, it's not a question, so just sharing. An extent that the hierarchical structure of the realms of existence exactly reproduces and corresponds to the hierarchical structure of consciousness. Okay, got it. Okay, Sarah does have a question. I have a question about the Buddha's teachings and the multiverse interpretation. During 10,000 Buddha's repentance, we recited texts I'm not familiar with, but it struck me as similar to the multiverse interpretation. Buddha told the bhikshus, even if the number of these particles of dust could be known, the number of all the Buddhas named Shakyamuni, whose mothers had the same name, whose fathers had the same name, and whose worlds, disciples, and attendants all had the same name, cannot be known. The Avatamsaka Sutra also describes infinite Buddhas from infinite worlds who are all speaking the Dharma simultaneously. Can these passages be interpreted as a multiverse worldview? I guess that's a question.
Well, from my perspective, multiverse as defined by Hugh Everett is just an evolution of wave function, basically. And every time it splits, right? So there is a trellis, right? These universes exist, but they always have some common starting point, right? So I'm not clear whether Avatamsaka talks about completely different trellises with no connection whatsoever, or everything is coming from the same spot. But one thing I would like to point out that with this Hoffman's new theory of agent, which is shown over here, this world is timeless and spaceless. Basically, it has no concept of time and no concept of space. So the concept of time and space is basically just an illusion, right? And the time is a count. Every time there is experience, there is uptick, one integer up, counting, action, one integer up, continues doing like this. These agents, starting as one bit, very simple, like bacteria or even less than bacteria, going through according to this model, become more complicated and then encompassing everything. What he actually said in one of the papers, I've read a number of his papers, he said something very interesting. If this perception, so Doug was talking about the contact will be P in this model, perception, right? There's a world which we have no idea what it is, right? It exists yet non-exists because it doesn't exist in space-time, right? It has its own realm, nobody knows. There is a contact, and it has our experience, and then based on our experience, we have this probability matrix, probability vector, which makes this action. This kind of thing, there are infinite number of these agents, right? And they have a hierarchical, and then there are separate agents, meaning separate conscious being. But at the top there is an agent. He calls this kind of God, but in the Buddhist interpretation, I would say it's Buddha. An interesting thing, he says, if that function P is very powerful, is very wide, then your experience can see the world, and just by having one glimpse of the world, right? One glimpse of the world, you know all the future, all of the past, everything. You don't need to know anything else. Just having one glimpse of the world, if your perception is infinite. So I think enlightened beings would have extremely broad P perception. They only look at the world and they see future, past, anything. But to answer this question, I think there is an infinite number of these agents. They don't have to be causally connected. Like, for example, even in our universe, faraway galaxies, they are moving away from us with a speed higher than speed of light. So there will be no causal connectivity with them. And that could be a model for all these different universes. But again, this is just one 3D interpretation, right? We might have many word interpretation where basically these words exist in different dimensions, right? In the moment of creation, when we are making the decision, for example, quantum computer, if the worlds are very similar, still we can go across the dimensions and grab the information from different choices and make quantum computers work as powerful as they can. Basically, they can outperform any millions of billions of regular computers on Earth, simply because there is a connection. So these different worlds can simply exist according to this model in different dimensions. So I don't see any contradiction.
Yeah. So I think it's just we're getting down to a really complex analysis of experience, but it doesn't, it's a very good description of what's going on in what's the realm of the dependent. If you look at the imagined, the dependent, if you look at dependent, it's an infinitely complex, causal, interrelated construct, all working on probabilities. And at any given time, I mean, I think this description that gets down to this level of detail of it in terms of energy fields is actually more accurate than, I don't think the sutras themselves get to this level of complexity of discussing it, but I don't see that it has any contradiction. And this idea that opening up the contact or the perception element of it, the problem for all of us is we each have a very limited perception, P, right now, based on our karmic conditions. As we cultivate, we would open up that P, the perceptual elements of it. And as we opened that up and saw the world and actually saw what was actually going on directly without the karmic conditions that are between us and seeing it, you can see that's just an analogy to then seeing from the Buddhas, from the Buddha mind, that we all actually are all actually at a fundamental level operating from. So it seems like this is just a very interesting analysis of that.
So we only have about 3 minutes left. And so I see there's a couple of questions, but there was another kind of question that was brought up as well. And I was wondering if you can just go to the last slide, Bogdan. It's kind of as a conclusion. And I was wondering, could you just share a little bit about the implications of these conclusions? Because it seems to me you had the classical physics, which was a kind of deterministic way of looking at the world. And then you have the quantum physics, which is a more probabilistic way of looking at the world. And now you're introducing this conscious agents approach of looking at the world, kind of where consciousness is primary. And as we saw how deterministic ways of seeing the world shaped our experience, and the way our society was created and so forth, with quantum kind of now doing things, how do you see this potentially shifting for our society or our lives as people just kind of thinking about the practical implications of this?
Yeah, so as you pointed out, the quantum physics has the problem. I purposely called it more complete version of classical physics, but not the most complete, because it still implies the primacy of matter. Basically, it says 3D space and time. Space-time is primary, and consciousness will be something beyond that. It basically takes the primary of matter. This is the first approach, basically, which says and tries to mathematically prove that the consciousness is primary and everything can be derived from this. What are the practical implications? Well, I mean, if we can prove that the theory of Yogacara is mathematically correct, then you don't need to try to convince people, do good things, don't do bad things, because people will know mathematically if they do bad things, then something bad will follow sooner or later, right? With mathematical precision. Karma is tough. Right, so that could be one potential thing which I see from this. You don't need to convince people, materialists who say, "Oh, I can do bad things because at the end of my life, all the information disappears." No, it doesn't disappear. According to this model, it continues. It continues and it will catch up. The bad karma, according to this model, is all your action change the world. Right, whatever it is, and it will continue there, irrespective of space and time, and it will catch up with you eventually. So do good things, avoid bad things, and practice, because when you practice, your perception increases. and you are going to see more and more of this world reality. And in the end, if you become Buddha, basically you will have one glimpse of the world, and you will see everything, all the living beings, all the past and all the future. This is according to this model. So of course it's a theory, right? Lots of work needs to be done, but I still have some issues with this model, but it's a mathematically described model, and we can point out the issues, and it could be improved.
Wow.
It would really put people back to looking at consciousness and their own experience of consciousness as the primary place where things are going on. Not only good and bad karma is going on, but where the emphasis on practice and observing the mind becomes the primary way that that meaning and aware, that a lot of things come together and take us away from both a deterministic model that most people right now are living in a deterministic model. And so take people away from that deterministic model and realize that observing at the level of consciousness had, profound implications not only for themselves, for their own experience, but generally is the most adequate description of what's actually going on.
Great. So I think there's a lot of other really good questions, but just given time, we'll maybe finish for now. And for sure, this is kind of a part 2, but there's probably going to be a part 3 for this conversation to continue. And I wanted to just make a couple brief announcements for people who want to plug in and maybe want to investigate your mind and how it works. So let me just share my screen here. So if you want to go dive deeper into Yogacara, in 2020, just this summer with Doug Powers and a number of other senior teachers, June 1st to 8th.
Hung Chi and Marty are both coming.
Yeah, Dharma's Hung Chi and Marty, Dr. Martin Verhoeven will be joining. And we'll be essentially looking at Buddhist Yogacara, which we're just talking about today, but bring it kind of in a dialogue with Western psychotherapy. And as we were just discussing how important the mind is, the question is, in that, how do we work with the mind? If we're not just going to be determined by all these external material or just, other factors, then how do we actually work with this conscious experience that we're in to actually expand our perception and our hearts to be able to deal with what's arising? So if you're interested, you can find this at this website right here, extension.drbu.edu, and summer 2024. We'll have links sent out afterwards as well if people are interested. Following that, we also have a Buddha Root Farm where Reverend Hung Chi and also Doug Powers will be there. And this will be up in the forests of Oregon, where we will, you could say, tap into the infinite compassion and vision of Guanyin Bodhisattva through reciting her name. I don't know, maybe that future talk could be on how does reciting the names of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas change our consciousness or tune into another whole field. We just recently had a Guanyin session in Bogdan. I was actually explaining, how does Guanyin Bodhisattva work? And it was an interesting kind of explanation for sure. The third thing, if people know of high school students who are interested in kind of diving more into DRBU and some of these interesting questions, which talk about cultivating our heart and mind. This is a summer kind of high school summer program, July 7th to the 20th, where we'll investigate contemplative philosophy. So the theme is you don't just think about philosophy, but you embody it, you do it. And it becomes a way of personal transformation. So a lot of really interesting materials here. It's a really wonderful program with, activities, movement, yoga, tai chi, and so forth. So they'll be diving deep into these wisdom texts in addition to into our own hearts and into kind of transforming our body. So that's the third one. And the very last one I want to say is we have another Guanyin retreat at the City of 10,000 Buddhas. And this will be led by Doug Powers. And you can find all this information on our website, and we'll also send out more details. So I just want to make those announcements. I don't know if there's anybody else wants to add, if anybody on the DRBU team sees anything I left out. If not, I just want to really appreciate Professor Bogdan and Doug for your insights and reflections on this kind of really important topic. I was actually quite stunned when you showed the equation from the mathematics of conscious agents and how you said how similar it was to the wave equation. That's like shocking.
Yeah.
That you can actually see some, I mean, just as, of course, it's just a theory, but there potentially is some link through a rigorous scientific mathematical approach that brings consciousness to the center and materiality and physics coming emergent out of that. I mean, that's, if you just kind of think about it, it's extremely profound. And you see how revolutionary physics has had on our current society. These ideas potentially could transform how we see the world for, you know, the future generations. And so anyways, just something to kind of reflect on. I don't know if Doug or Bogdan want to say any last reflections before we finish.
Well, from my perspective, it's a work in progress. So you mentioned part 3, and yeah, I would like to this continue. I think it's quite exciting what's going on now.
Anything, Doug?
No, we'll just work on part 3. We've actually been talking about doing an institute on, you know, an actual institute of this. So we'll see what happens in terms of people's time. Everyone's got a lot of things going on. But yeah, I think if we can just continue on with this for a while, kind of developing the foundations of the discussion, and then we'll see what happens.
Okay, great. So I think that will conclude for today. And if you want to continue to plug in, you can sign up for the newsletter or just follow us on the DRBU website. We'll make follow-up announcements for when part 3 develops. So otherwise, wish everyone a good rest of the day or rest of the night, wherever you might be in the world. And if you just reflect on, if I were to see the world primarily as consciousness rather than materiality, how would things change? You know, the person sitting next to you isn't just a body. There's actually an awareness in there that we can actually take care of. And, you know, same thing for ourselves. We're not just controlled by biological factors only. It's actually something very deep awareness in ourselves we can cultivate. So something worth thinking about. Okay, wish everyone well and hope to see you back.
Take care. Take care.